We've just been talking about how on earth we fix the economy in this country. Tax rates should go down, says Annie, to 40 pence. We need the rich to have the cash to create more jobs, says Annie. I've got to say, I agree with you. My question to you, though, Annie, would be, do you think the timing is now, though, really to take us back to a 40% situation? Mick says, what do you mean, high earners? Well, that is the interesting point, isn't it? That does divide opinions as to what is rich, what is wealthy. Richard is talking about fracking. You're saying that one of the answers in this situation would be for us to frack more, to become more energy independent. Then we perhaps wouldn't have to spend so much money subsidising energy prices, I think is your point there. Anne says, Gordon Brown introduced the 50% tax on leaving office so that it was a time bomb for the Conservatives. Keep your thoughts coming in on that. Now, it is official, isn't it? The Royal College of Nursing has voted to strike for the first time nationally in more than a century. What do you think to this, basically? I was going to talk waffling on and on, but I'm just going to get to the point. Do you think that nurses should be going on strike or not? Michael, where do you stand?
Well, look, first of all, I want to say I certainly don't begrudge people that do very important jobs, you know, seeking a higher wage. I think that's fair enough. However, I'm pretty shocked that we're seeing this strike. I looked into, you know, the circumstances around this and the wages and often. Don't forget at the moment, we talk about lockdown. The legacy of lockdown, I think there's about 7 million people at the moment on waiting lists for various treatments. So this is, in a way, to me, is sort of kicking the NHS when it's already down substantially. Now, as you say, the government are saying this equates to, this demand is a 17% rise. It would cost 9 billion quid. Newly qualified nurse apparently starts off around 27k, more in London. And I think the average nurse's pay, NHS nurse's pay is 34,000, and a senior nurse consultant can earn up to 55,000. So people will have, you know, different views on those amounts of money if they think it's reasonable for nurses to be going on strike. Over that, personally, I think with the economic circumstances as they are, you know, even in normal economic circumstances, asking for a 17% pay rise is pretty unrealistic, I think. And as I said, this is going to add stress, I imagine, to an NHS that's already struggling with.
And on the specific principle, because some sectors, industries, professions, they're not allowed to strike, do you think that nurses should be allowed to strike, irrespective of the whys, wherefores, reasons, actually being able to down tools and strike as a nurse? Do you think that should be allowable or not?
I don't particularly know. I think any job where it's so essential that people could actually die, I think as long as people know what the wage is when they start and they choose to do the job, then I think it's dangerous to that degree where it's involving people's health care and missing appointments for critical care. No, frankly, I don't think it should be allowed.
Matthew, where are you on it?
Yeah, I mean, I read something that said that, according to one report into this, and this has been contradicted by another report, but one report suggested, I think, that nurses since 2010, I mean, their pay has essentially gone down by about 20% when you take inflation and so forth into it. It's not true to say this is a 17.5% pay rise. We're facing massive inflation. What people are interested in is what they're able to buy with their money, not whether it's 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand, but what can they actually buy when they go to Tesco or wherever they shop. It's quite clear to me that the NHS is in some sort of crisis. Lots of people are said to have left. Huge numbers of people are said to have left. Yes, partly because of Brexit, partly because of pay, partly because of conditions. This is one of the things that I do for a living. I talk for a living. I've hosted shows, I interview people, I go on stage, I talk to you, I have a view on things, I write books. I probably get paid quite significantly more than nurses get paid. And that can't be right. These are people who are keeping us alive. Yet we have huge respect in this country for doctors, and rightly so. We certainly don't want to go back to the days where Jeremy Hunt was taking on the junior doctors. But nurses are doing an absolutely essential role. Just as you were saying, Michael, I don't think there's a person in this country who doesn't have respect for what nurses do. And I can just tell you that given that this is the first strike in over 100 years, if it goes ahead, over 100 years, what does that tell us? What we should be talking about, I think, is how desperate they must feel in order to put patient safety at risk. And although emergency care will continue, patient safety will be at risk. There will be knock-on effects of this, and I suspect people will die. And that means this is extreme. Let's listen to them, hear them, and go to the negotiating table.
Just to be clear as well, by the way, because I know people are writing about this, RCM members did go on strike previously in Northern Ireland, but this is like the first time.
Nationwide.
Nationwide one, just so we know. Go on.
So as I said, the average NHS nurse wage from my research is 34,000. Now, there are a number of very important sectors where the average wage is significantly less than that. One thinks of the care sector, people who work in care homes. What happens if they all decide they're going to go on strike? How many people are going to die? At the end of the day, you've got to put this into perspective. Of course, it's, people are allowed to want to earn more money, but when you go into this sort of sector, you know what the pay scales are.
Michael,
and I actually think there are sectors that are far worse paid than this one.
It's an absolutely valid point, that, in my view, that you raised, that this isn't just about nurses. This is about people, hospital attendants. This is about porters. This is about all the sorts of people that we came so much to respect, particularly during the pandemic, on the front line when they're helping keep this country running. So it's a very important point there. As I said at the very start of this programme, there aren't easy choices. We are in a serious pickle. None of us want to see people who are keeping us alive, keeping our parents alive. In the case of midwives delivering our babies, I had a baby 6 weeks ago, none of us want to see these people, thank you, none of us want to see these people struggle in the way that they clearly are, because if they weren't struggling, these are people who go into their jobs to make the world a better place. They would not be threatening strikes if it were not for the fact that they are in a desperate state and our NHS is being brought to its knees.
I asked you guys at home, by the way, I've been running a Twitter poll about whether or not you support the nurses going on strike. Get this, 76% of you said no, you don't. Only a quarter of you guys that responded to that Twitter poll said yes, you do. See, because where I sit, my mum and my sister are both NHS nurses, right? And I actually spoke to my sister, I don't think she'll mind me mentioning this, and asking, what's your situation and all the rest of it. And her view was she was reluctantly going to go on strike, not because of the money necessarily, but to try and send a message to the government that actually the NHS, it's broken. It's absolutely broken. And I completely agree that it is. But maybe then the message to the government needs to be not necessarily just about the pay, but what is the NHS? What is it for? I think someone needs to have the confidence, I almost used the word I shouldn't at tea time. Someone needs to have the confidence to pick up this massive beast of the NHS and do a proper evaluation on, is it fit for purpose? Well,
if you remember, one of Rishi Sunak sort of gone under the radar, but he's actually U-turned on a couple of ththings already, because one of his proposals during the Conservative leadership campaign was to fine patients £10 if they missed a GP appointment, idea. And that is, I don't think that's going to happen.
Brilliant.
What I would say as well, in terms of the restructuring, it always strikes me as quite incredible, and actually, non-partisan, this applies to Labour and Conservative governments. One of the problems we have in this country is too much short-term thinking. Governments plan until the next election.
They do.
They don't plan over 10 or 20 years. And so we have this perpetual cycle, it seems, where we have not enough NHS staff, be it doctors or nurses, trained in this country, and you continually see then sort of a mad panic to try and bring in foreign workers, because we haven't had the foresight to think, OK, well, with the population increase we're likely to see or whatever, in 10 years' time, how many doctors, how many nurses, right, let's start training them now.
But, Michael, do you understand that the problem with that point, given what you said earlier, and that is that why are people going to want to train to be a nurse if the nurses of this country are sending a message that Michelle just quite rightly said they were sending, which is the NHS is almost broken?
It's on its knees.
It's on its knees. Why are they going to want to become nurses unless we pay them decently?
Well, OK, so £27,000 starting wage more in London and £34,000 average. OK, it's not a huge amount of money. It's certainly a lot more than a lot of other people earn, for instance, in care. You can't say this is like they're being paid absolutely nothing. People want to be paid more. OK, that's fair and reasonable. I don't think those wages justify going on a strike and put people's lives in danger.
What you say, by the way, about social care is really important, and I agree with you.
Well, they're paid like 18, 20k, I think.
And there is a massive crisis in social care in this country that Boris Johnson said he would fix and hasn't fixed, even though he broke, I think, an election pledge by raising national insurance. The crisis in social care, it's really important that we all understand this, is a crisis for the NHS, because if social care is broken, that puts an intolerable strain on the NHS. And I'm afraid I have to go back to what I was saying earlier. We are in a mess, and tough, difficult choices are going to have to be made.
There's only a limited amount of money. If the government cave in on this, it'll be social care next. Who will it be next? We can't afford continually to give people 17% pay rises.
Well, there you go. Tell me your thoughts on that. Ken, you say all the news coverage just concentrates on pay. My daughter's an NHS staff nurse. She works 12-hour shifts, and if she's lucky, she gets a 30-minute lunch break. She's got to be on the ward 30 minutes before the start of a shift, stay another 30 minutes at the end to deal with the handovers. A minimum 13-hour shifts. By the end of it, she's absolutely exhausted, all for 32k a year. Many of you are pointing out things like parking and saying it's not just perhaps just about pay, but all of the other things that would help make nurses' life easier. I hear you on that one. Someone else has just been in touch saying, Matthew's talking about discrepancy in wages. You're bringing into it footballers. You're saying, why don't we limit footballers' wages or tax them even more for kicking a football about? Interesting strategy you've got there. Tax the likes of your footballers to give to the nurses. Do you think that would work? How well do you think that would be received? Tell me your thoughts on that one.